an auspicious start.
So, welcome to another board game review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
Are you sure you're not John Cusack?
Yeah, I think so. For those that don't know, Say Anything, 1980s. That's the movie that I was...
So,
anyway, go ahead.
We're playing
Go ahead.
1989 Dawn of Freedom by GMT Games. This one we have had on our radar for a long time. I know you've wanted this for a long time.
Well, it went on the P500, I want to say, 14 years ago for the second edition.
Yeah, is it second edition or second printing?
It's second printing. Okay. Sorry, second printing. If you remember, we looked for it. Like, we would go to Origins. Yeah. I would scour those... used board game companies, and I think I found one, but it was
very expensive.
It was like $96 or something. I'm like, I'll just wait. But literally, it finally came out. I think we've had it for nearly 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, it came out just the end of 2020, right?
Yeah, it did.
But yeah, this is so it's one of those 2-player card-driven area control games, very much in the ilk of Twilight Struggle. And
I think it's mostly Twilight Struggle with some new toys added.
Yeah, it's because
which isn't bad.
It's designed by Ted Torgerson and Jason Matthews.
Right.
Jason Matthews designed Twilight Struggle.
Yeah, Jason Matthews of Twilight Struggle
this is
fame
very
and
much
Imperial Struggle
the
fame.
sequel to that game, right? Twilight Struggle, you play the whole of the Cold War start to finish.
Yep.
This is 1989, and it is
the 1 year
very much focused in. You play 1 year, but you play a ton of this. Early year, mid-year, and late year, things you're very familiar with. And it's just East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia,
Hungary,
Romania, and Bulgaria. Right, so it's a much more smaller focused game, but the mechanics are very similar. Mm-hmm. What you're doing is very similar, but it's just a finer level of detail out of the events that you're getting and what's actually going on, and all of the pivotal events that happened. Is basically the Union collapsed and the wall fell down.
Well, and I think along those same lines with it being similar, very similar, it's kind of cool because they melded a couple of the mechanics from Twilight Struggle kind of together. So the support checks in this game are in essence like a coup.
Yes.
Very similar to a coup. And it's just interesting how they used the same concept and just switched it around a bit.
Like there's not a space race track. There's this Tiananmen Square track where you're throwing influence into that. Yep. But it's been refined. It's been changed a little bit. It works slightly differently, as do a number of the mechanics. But the bones of this game are things you'll be very, very familiar with if you've played Twilight Struggle, right?
Yeah. So I think if you like Twilight Struggle, to me, this is just the next version of that.
Yeah.
And you're going to like it as well. I had a great time playing this game.
I had a blast with this. There's no reason, if you enjoy Twilight Struggle, why you wouldn't enjoy this. Yeah. You might think it's not as good. You might think it's a little bit better. Right. But if you like that, you're going to like this. Like this, that's just not.
Well, there's just so much to like about the card-driven game mechanic, the card angst, the biting of the nails when you're like, how do I play this to get what I need? Mitigation of damage, the tug of war of, oh, you just placed 3 influence there, and oh, I just took out that 3 influence and placed another one.
Yeah. Your whole ops versus events.
Yeah,
there's just so many elements of that.
It's just such a great, I think, a mechanic to tell a story about history. Yes. I've always enjoyed them. We've played dozens. It's probably one of my more favorite mechanics. Yeah. So
the other aspect to this that I think is important is how having played Twilight Struggle, this was so easy to learn.
Oh, yeah.
And it plays in, at most, 3 hours.
Yes.
Sometimes Twilight Struggle, when we were playing it the first times, it was 3 to 4 hours.
Yep.
Because you're learning how to play and play well, and it can be, it feels like those games can go long. Because we have some experience in these, our first game was like 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And it only got to like round 6 or 7 because there were some instant victories. But I think that's going to happen more often than not.
Well, because of the way those battleground and scoring cards work, it's very punishing for the loser.
Yeah,
you're going to lose.
Things can swing quite quickly.
You're going to lose support in those countries. You're going to, it can potentially really be swingy.
Yeah, it was nice to play a game where I was familiar with the mechanics. We jumped right in. Here's the couple of nuances that are different. Yeah. And in the Power Struggle deck is something that's quite new, but
Yeah.
It
wasn't complex.
Not a complex or unfamiliar style of mechanic.
I think with these games, and I think what you would say, you would agree with me, I hope, when you play Twilight Struggle the first time, a lot of it is really trying to learn the cards.
Yeah.
You're reading the mechanic, you're trying to understand what does that subtly mean, or like in this one, they kept referring to Eastern Europe. And we're like, well, this in essence is all Eastern Europe, except a little portion of the Balkans. So that was a distinction that I think we learned later, and we're like, oh, okay, now we fully understand that. But it's a matter of learning those cards, kind of becoming familiar with those cards, so that you generally know the makeup of these decks.
Yeah.
What are the real poison pills for you?
Yeah. Do I put a whole bunch of guys in Prague, and
Knowing,
then the communist player's like, see ya.
Yeah, get out. And that actually happened with another game we played recently, 2 Minutes to Midnight, also on the Cold War. I wouldn't have done certain things because I knew those cards were in the deck.
Yes.
Until after they would have been out of it.
Yeah, you don't have those gotcha moments in your second and third plays of this because you've seen the powerful moves that
you
can
may
happen.
Still have it, but it's going to be, you're going to try to plan around it. Yeah. And I think that's something I've always enjoyed about card-driven games, is I do want to become familiar with the deck. I don't have to memorize every card, but I kind of remember, there's these cards that do this and this type of thing, so I got to watch.
But the more you remember, the more you play, the more you see, the better you will be at this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Yes.
This is going to be one of those games you're going to play 3, 4, maybe even 5 times before you really get comfortable with those decks.
Yeah,
and
when you can start to really predict, like, it's I don't have this card in my hand. The odds of you having it are this. The odds of it still being in what's left of the deck are this.
Yeah.
So you can say,
how many
gamble here or there?
How many times did I say to you, "Oh, I know you're holding that Poland scoring card," and I think only one time you were actually holding it.
Yeah, there's once.
But you kind of can tell that, right? It hasn't come up. You can see the deck's running out.
Yeah.
You know it's not in the discard. Oh, and then by the way, we know what scoring cards are placed in the deck
at what time. It's not in my hand, and you keep doing a bunch of stuff in Poland.
He's got it. Yeah, right. So that's the familiarity. I also like how in this one, I liked the innovation of these symbols. So that stood for worker spaces and farm spaces, intellectual, student, church, elite, bureaucratic.
Yeah.
So those little symbols, they tied to a couple different aspects. Sometimes cards that you played would say, place support in student spaces. So you knew you could only put those, if you use the event, into those student spaces. But then sometimes those student spaces benefited you in the power struggle because you had a student leader that could act as a wild card.
And I really liked that little element. It's just another kind of added layer where they can differentiate events on cards to relay a bit more about what that event did historically as well. It just adds an extra little filter on there, which is, it's neat. The whole power struggle cards is something we'll talk about because this is a new thing that's been added to this system. Whenever you would do a power struggle
or a scoring card,
so a scoring card triggers
a power
struggle in that country. And the communists are trying to retain control of the government, and the Democratic Party is just trying to topple the government. And so, based on the number of regions or cities you control in that country, you get a number of cards from this deck, and usually it's anywhere from
6 at the minimum, because I think for the first space you control
you get 6, and you get 2 per extra. So you can get up to 15, 20 if you've got a lot.
I think the most I had was 14. I think one time you had 10 or 12.
Yeah. And so then you do this little card off. So if I'm initiating this power struggle, I may play, and the cards have suits. I play a strike. You have to play a strike back, and then we go again. I play a march. You play a march back.
Or a wild card.
Yeah, or a wild card.
Based on the leader type that match those symbols
or
that you control.
If I've got a ton of cards and I've got 7 strikes, I'm going to keep going until I've got a strike and you don't have any left. I win the power struggle.
Yeah.
And then you roll some dice. Because you lost, you're going to lose a number of support points there based on that die roll. And then I'm going to gain some victory points based on a die roll as well.
Yeah.
And then you do the regular
scoring,
presence, domination, and control scoring that you normally would.
Yeah.
And then, if the communists are in power still, they get a certain number of victory points based on the card.
Yep.
Or if the Democrats win, the government collapses, and that scoring card is removed from the game.
Which is very interesting.
So it can't be scored until, end-game scoring.
Yeah.
But if it's early game, you're like, Poland's now basically useless if the Democrats get a hold of it. And then, also, the communists lose the capacity to score from their power as well. It's very interesting, this whole extra added layer within the regular scoring as well.
I think the first time we did the power struggle, I was like, oh, this feels... I felt like it felt tacked on at first, but I think because we did 4 or 5 of them, I started to think, this isn't tacked on. It's really well integrated.
Yeah.
Once again, every time I knew a scoring card could come up, I was checking my regions and saying, okay, I've got a good smattering of the different symbols, so I'm going to be able to use those leader cards in the deck if I draw them.
And the leaders are wilds, which makes them really
very powerful. So I that felt very integrated into it. It was built into it. And then I really liked how if the Soviets win, they're going to put a marker there that says, oh, you've won this one time previously. You won it again, so now you're going to get more victory points. So it's like
the more times that the communists can hold on to power, the more points they're going to get.
Yeah. So it becomes really integral to what you're doing. I think we did, like I said, 4 or 5 of those. Maybe we did more than that.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately you won the first one, and I was like, holy crap, that was powerful.
Yeah.
And then I think I won.
And then I think I lost every single one after that.
Yeah, and I began to realize how powerful that was, to not only make sure you had the most spaces so you got more cards, but also have the different symbols to allow flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's what led to my quick victory there, because you were losing support every time.
Yeah, it's very punishing one way or the other, and I think that's one of the reasons that the game doesn't drag on either.
Yeah,
like this, you'd be hard pressed to make it more than 3 hours.
Yeah,
just because the game will move in directions that you push it in with your play as well.
Yeah,
which is nice, right? You don't want a game to overstay its welcome. This definitely doesn't do that.
Right.
One other thing I enjoyed about the power struggle is whilst the cards, it's just suits. It's like strikes, petitions, rallies, marches. And it's generic in a way, because it's just a picture of like a strike.
Yeah.
But I think it works in this because because of the scale of the game. Mm-hmm. There's national strikes going on, there's marches going on. You don't have that in like Twilight Struggle, because you don't have the whole of Asia's going on strike.
Right.
That's done. Right, that doesn't happen. But on this smaller level, those things feel a bit more intimate.
Well, that minutia becomes very relevant to what was going on. And the reality of this was, it was that type of movement. It was a grassroots movement.
Yeah.
Where the communists started to lose their power because there were students protesting.
Yeah.
Tiananmen Square is a prime example of that. There were also writers behind the scenes criticizing the Soviet machine.
That's one of my favorite parts of this, is the way that the maps is set up, is that you'll have the intellectuals and writer spaces are isolated.
They are very isolated.
Connected only to the universities, so that's who they influence.
Yep.
The universities then start branching out, but those universities are very fickle places.
Yeah.
It's very easy to
change
control
their
for
attitudes.
either sides of those.
Yep.
And so they flip-flop back and forth, so you want to get them on your side and then start scoring.
Yep.
But the way that everything's linked together in Snakes is very interesting.
Yeah.
And purposeful, more than just because those, to me, they're ideologically connected rather than geographically, because again, the countries are so small. It's not like, these have like good trade routes and stuff. All right,
no, it's the same country.
Dresden's connected to Chemnitz. Yes, that obviously they are.
Right,
but it's the way that they're connected ideologically is the real map.
Yeah,
and I think it's fascinating. The churches are connected to certain areas depending on how much influence they had over the region. So the Catholic Church in Poland is connected to a lot of places.
Yeah, 1, 2, 5, right?
But the Lutheran Church in Leipzig is connected Well, it's connected
one
to
or
like
two.
Yeah, it's connected to one space.
Yep,
the
you're
Lutheran
right.
Church. But if they can get into the city, then it branches out very quickly.
Yeah.
I just think some of that stuff is a really interesting map-making design standpoint, and how they poured over that would have been really cool.
Well, and it's really a condition or a product of the element of, in order to place support on the map, you have to daisy chain, right?
Yes.
You can't just say, oh, I'm going to put 3, support all the way here in Polish Riders, which is totally disconnected to everything. You can't do that. Now, certain events will say, put it anywhere, or put it in that spot. So,
and once you get them there, it's hard for the other person to root.
Yeah. Or I made the comment a couple of times where you got quite the red wall built there in the middle of Czechoslovakia, because I couldn't just leapfrog you and start putting support on the other side. I had to combat you.
You have to go through those, which is expensive.
Yeah. But I think that's a big part of what they tried to do, was isolate certain areas, make it more challenging to get to, require a little bit of work, and really force you to think about, how am I going to utilize my scarce operations points to benefit myself the most? I really enjoyed the support roles. Those were fascinating.
Yes.
And once again, it's similar to the coup in Twilight Struggle, where you're going to remove a bunch of support.
I might remove yours and add mine if I roll well enough.
Very cool concept. It was very beneficial to do those more often than not.
If they succeed.
But they really can be swingers. I mean, be a big swing in the momentum. The one key is a space's stability rating is doubled, and you have to overcome that to do anything to it.
Yeah.
Now, you do have various modifiers, from having controlled territories that connect. Sometimes events would give you benefits.
Yeah.
And you're using the op value on the card you played
as a
to
modifier,
take it.
Yeah.
So taking all those things into account, more often than not, the 3 spaces all day long, right? We're going to go for the 3 spaces because that's doable.
It's achievable.
It's achievable.
It's not easy, but yeah.
Now the 1 spaces, it was like, okay, you've got 4 in there now. You are not going to have that at the end of the round, because I'm going to bash you.
And the 1s are all the universities.
Yes.
And that's what we talked about with them being real fickle.
Yep.
Like, you
can change them at a whim.
Right? They're easily influenced by, like, ideology and thoughts, but then they're also very easily trampled upon by the communist government forces just walk in and smash the place
So that
up.
really fit that well, but I loved that concept of those support rules. Very, very well done. Very cool.
Yeah.
Risky, but very cool.
And how they're allocated and where they are on the board is also very interesting, right? The Lutheran Church, for example, is a 5.
You're never going to get that.
You can't get the adjacency bonuses, but from 1 space alone.
Yeah.
You never get... Like,
that's going to be
political power to take control of that. It's not coming from doing support checks.
No.
Right? It might be a little bit easier if you can surround the Catholic Church in Poland, for example.
Right.
You can get a few more adjacency bonuses.
Yeah.
Just because it's connected to a few more spaces. But those have a 5 double. You've got to exceed a 10.
And you're just never going to do
a really
that.
good card.
Yeah.
Handles, and it's like, not even worth it. Yeah. It's not even worth trying.
Well, because you're going to roll a die, and then you add that to your and you might get a 6 or a 7.
And you end up
on a 10.
Like 1 guy.
You're not going to get anything. So... very cool. I also thought the churches were well placed. The Lutheran and the Catholic, much more influential in their countries.
Yeah.
Whereas the Orthodox churches in Romania and Bulgaria, not as influential.
Yeah.
A little more easily
not
overtaken.
Not connected to as many spaces.
Not connected.
Right?
So that was cool. A subtle difference that I thought was well done. The more I talk about this, I'm like, yeah, this was pretty good.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah, even the events, we kept saying, ooh, these are very cool effects. They were just different. Yes. They were markedly different from Twilight Struggle.
Yeah, it would be really easy to take that event deck, rename everything, and put it in. Right? Yeah. That would be a very lazy way to do that. But it's absolutely not the case.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge credit to the design. So what I'll do is I'll show you the map, show you some of the cards, how it all works, because... the rulebook is not big. It is not complicated.
It's like 10 pages, I think.
Yeah.
They have a playbook.
They do. But you don't need it.
Yeah, you don't need it.
But I'll show you all that and we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So here's a look at the map. And as you can see, it's a section of Central Europe here. So we have East Germany up in this kind of grey block, Poland in this tan block, the old former Czechoslovakia here in the green block, and then we've got Hungary in an orange, Romania in this kind of pinkish puce colour maybe? I don't know colours. And then Bulgaria down here in green, in a light green. And very much, if you've seen Twilight Struggle, this is like that in that you've got these boxes that represent regions or cities, and they have 2 holding boxes for the democratic or the communist influence points. What's different here, though, is that you have these other symbols and values. That's their control limits. So you have to have 3 more than your opponent to control it, but then the extra part, you got this symbol. So this symbol is a hammer. This means this is a worker place. This is where lots of workers are. This is the Catholic Church, got this little church symbol in it. This star is for bureaucrats. This is a bureaucratic space. This, with the limousine here, this is the elites. That's where an elite space. The little peace symbol is for students. The little typewriters for intellectuals, and these sickles are for farmers, which are different from workers. So that's what and everything is connected by these points as well. This blue-red stripe that is not present here, this blue-red stripe indicates that it is a battleground area. And that's important for having control and for dominance of regions when they're scored. So again, if you've played Twilight Struggle, a lot of that's going to be very familiar to you. Instead of a space race, we have this Tiananmen Square track, where you're tossing cards for influence in the kind of wider world, so to speak. It works slightly differently in that you can attempt this multiple times in a given hand, but once you get to the limit, you can't ever do it again. So you can toss a bunch of bad cards in here, and you're adding the card value plus any other modifiers you might have to try and roll above this number. So for the Democratic side, it's 5, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s. For the communists, it's 6s, 7s, 8s, 6, 5. So these last few get a little bit easier. But that's kind of the most of what this is. We got a little power struggle table, which you use for when you do a power struggle, when areas are scored. We'll go through that here in just a second. But your familiarity with other CDGs will lend a hand here, because this is has a lot of the same hallmarks as Twilight Struggle. So what we'll look at is some of the cards here. So we got our event deck of cards. You're going to get a hand of 8 cards. And currently these say middle year. These are middle year cards. We've got early year cards. And then there's also late year cards, because this whole game takes place in, you guessed it, 1989. So those tell you the date it's seeded. You start with the early deck, you go through it, then you get the mid deck, you go through it, then you get the late deck. Those are added to what's left, and you're playing through those. So, like many CDGs, each of these are aligned. They have an ops value. These are both 3. This is a blue star, it's democratically aligned. This is a red star, it's communist aligned. If you wish to play the event, it has to be aligned with you. If you, as the democratic player, play this card for the ops, then the event, which is linked to the communist player, that will trigger. You don't have a choice about it. And then you've got, this has a little asterisk on it. If this event triggers, this is removed from the game. It will not get shuffled back into the deck. This one does not have that. You play it, it gets discarded, it gets shuffled back into the deck when appropriate. So, again, very similar to the things that you've seen in many CDGs. You're going to have a hand of cards, you're going to have a bunch of blue, you're going to have a bunch of red, there's a couple of grey ones which are neutral, so either player can play them. But you're looking at, when it's your turn, you choose a card, do you play the ops, or do you play the event? If you're democratic, you have a democratic event, or you have the ops. You get to choose which one of those. That's your kind of binary choice. I'm either going to spend the ops. I got 4 ops. I can either spend that to place 4 influence out, generally speaking, or I can use it to do a oh my gosh, I can't remember the name. A support check. That's the right name. In 2 areas, and it's always 2 areas, but you get a +4 modifier to your support check die roll. That's where the 4 comes in handy when you do that. If you play a 3 card, you get 2 areas, but you get a +3 to each of the rolls. The other option that you have is you can ditch it into the Tiananmen Square track. you would get a +4 to your die roll modifier to go up on this track. And you might want to do that, because if you get ahead, then you get this bonus. That bonus is cancelled out when the opponent's level. So if you get a couple spots ahead, you can start getting these really cool bonuses, which include modifiers to dice rolls, extra cards, removing opposition supports, drawing extra cards, things like that. But that's your choice if this is your faction-aligned card. If it's not, I'm going to either choose to do the ops. I can't choose to do the event, but when I do play the ops, my choice is, does the opponent do the event before I spend my ops or after I spend my ops? But the event will trigger for my opponent. So again, this is a game like many of the other CDGs where it's a game of hand management. You've got a 50-50 mix of good and bad cards. How many bad cards can I toss away in Tiananmen Square without reducing my influence on the board? Or do I just suck it up, you get all the cool events, and I'm using my points to affect on the board? That's some of the big tough choices you got. How and when the effects that are negative trigger is up to you with how you play them. So you're looking at the order in which you play your cards. Do I do a bunch of really good stuff and then a couple negative things to kind of outweigh that? Or do I just chuck a bunch of bad cards out, see what happens, then I've got all my good cards that I can kind of maybe undo a lot of the stuff that's happened? And you're hoping that your opponent's in a similar dilemma. And you want to, how many are you tossing away in Tiananmen Square before that's all used up? Or if you throw a bunch of cards in there, you just don't have the cards to play out on the board. And that's tough, because you're going to hurt yourself. And do I hurt myself more by doing nothing out here? Or do I hurt myself more by those events doing bad things, but I also get some good things with the ops? And those are some of the real important choices you've got to make. Now, with your ops, what we'll look at here, let's say we've got 4 ops as the democratic player. If I'm using that to place influence, you have to spend all the ops to place influence. So you can place 4 influence is the most that you can do. So you would only place in places that are adjacent to where you're connected. So we are here, this is adjacent, we can place one in here. So you can put 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we'll put one in there, and we'll put it on the uncontrolled side there. We're going to put one there, that'll be nice. We'll put one in Prague, but because Prague is communist controlled, which means they have at least 3 more than me, it costs 2 op points to put the first one in there. So I put the first one in there, this flips over because now it's not controlled, they don't have 3 more than me. And so I've used up 1, 2, 3, I've only got 1 left, I can put an extra one in there for a 2. So that's kind of my 4 op points if I was going to do that. Or you can just blitz somewhere. Well, guess what? There's nothing in there, so I'm just going to spend all 4 to get a really big lead in there. That means I'm really close to being able to control that by adding 1 more in there. Or you might do 2 and 2. And what you can't do is, for example, I'm already in Dresden. What I can't do is I can't say, oh, I'm going to put 1 here, and then I'm going to put 2 in here, because I was not adjacent to this at the beginning of my action round. So you can't springboard and blitz through those things. You have to have been there at the beginning of the card. So I can put as many as I want in here. I can put a bunch in here because I'm connected to Leipzig. I can put a bunch in Berlin, but I can't put any in here or all the way up here or anything like that. So it keeps the game a bit more measured and a bit more realistic and a bit more controllable. Now it's very... If you were able to just kind of spring everywhere, it would be very wild, and there wouldn't be a lot of control in the game. I don't think it would just be just go wherever you want, and you'd lose a lot in that. But that's placing influence. That's basically one of your 3 options. One of the options is Tiananmen Square. The only other thing that you can do is to do support checks. And like we said, when you do that option, you get 2 support checks. You declare and resolve one completely, then you declare and resolve another one. You do not have to, assign them both, and you can do them in the same area if you were so inclined. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick an area that has opposition influence. That's the only important thing that you have to worry about. There has to be opposition influence there. So what we'll do is let's pick Dresden. We've got 7 points, they've got 6. I want to take control of this, but I have to have 4 more than them to do that. So I'm going to try to reduce the opposition control by doing a support check, as that's the key outcome of a support check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this value, this control value. This is a 4. You're going to double it to 8. That's your target number you're trying to exceed. So I'm going to roll a d6, and I got to get more than an 8. Well, that's not possible. But with the modifiers, it is. So I'm going to add 4 to my die roll, because that's the ops value. And I'm going to add 1 for every adjacent area that I control. I have 1, 2. So I'm going to add 6 to a d6. Got to exceed 8. That's pretty good odds. If the communists controlled any adjacent areas, those would subtract from my modifiers. So it's a net. But currently, we've got 4, 5, 6. So we're going to roll d6. And I rolled a 3 plus 6 is 9. And it's the difference between the target number of 8 and the roll of 9 is how many you remove from the opposition. So 6 down to 5, that's not great. I was hoping for a better roll than that. But guess what? Because I have another one, I can declare it here. We're going to go for Dresden again. Same roll. Nice. So I rolled a 6. 6 and 6 is 12. So I'm going to remove 4 influence from there. So we're going to go all the way down to a 1. And because this difference is now greater than 4, I control Dresden. So for them to put more in there, it's going to be more and more expensive. So that was... it cost a lot. That's a big card to do that. I didn't take the really good event. And it was an investment. Unfortunately, I rolled poorly that first time, so I had to roll again there. I didn't have to, it was my choice. But that's how you remove influence from an area. Not normally speaking is doing that. And it can be very difficult when these 5 spaces with nothing adjacent to it, it's impossible to stack and get all those modifiers. It's very hard to remove places from religious institutions. Whereas if you look at the universities, they're a 1 and they have a couple adjacent. So 1 doubled is 2. You're almost always going to roll more than a 2 because you've played at least 1 card, which will have, even if it's 1 ops value, it's a +1 to d6. You're almost always going to be removing stuff. Those flip-flop very easily, very quickly. And I just love that it's how that works within the course of the game. So that's that. So that's all the stuff you can do with your cards. When you start getting into the meat and potatoes of the game is when you play a scoring card. So when you get a scoring card, this is for East Germany. You're going to assess what's here in East Germany, and then you're going to gain victory points based off of that. So the first thing that happens is you do a power struggle. That's very different from Twilight Struggle. There's this power struggle deck of cards, and the power struggle deck of cards is a bunch of different suits. So this suit is the M, and it's a circle, it's a march. This is the P with a hexagon, and it's a petition. Circle, march. It says marches, strikes, and there's, what do we got here? There's these L with a star, it's leaders. These are intellectual leaders specifically, an elite leader, petitions, and then we also have, there's a couple of these special W's that have, those just have like, almost like an event card. Instead of major ops, and there's these rallies. The rallies aren't worth very much, but they give you a real big bonus if you can win with those. So, you get a number of cards based on the number of areas you control in a region. So, in this instance, if we're doing East Germany, the Democrats, the first space gets you 6, and then you get +2 for each other area you control. So, the Democrats are going to get 10 cards, and the communists are only going to get 8. So you just shuffle those out. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8. 10. And because we'll say the Democratic player initiated this, that means they get to kind of choose and do the things first. They're the attacker, so to speak. So as such, your first option is you can ditch 3 cards to raise the stakes. And what that means is, post-resolution of this power struggle, you're going to get positives to your support, loss, and victory point die rolls. Means there's potentially more points at stake, and the loser's going to lose more support. But you have to discard 3 cards to trigger that, which means your hand is, in theory, less powerful. But you kind of have a leaf through, and you look, well, I can't use some of these cards. So, for example, this worker leader, you have to have control in a worker area to use it. I do, so I'm going to keep that. But if you had an intellectual leader, I don't control it, I can't use it. If you have a bunch of those, sometimes, if you think you can win, it's worth the investment of ditching some cards to do that. I'm not going to do it, Communist player's not going to do it, so then I just play a card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one of my cards to play, and let's say I'm going to play a strike. And this has a 5 value, and I'm going to use that to defend my initiative. That's quite important. Now, the Communist player has to play a strike. Of course, I have a hand of cards that doesn't have one. So, well, do I have any leaders? Do I have any leaders that I can use? I have an elite leader. No, communists can't use that. An intellectual leader. Communists can't use that. And an elite leader. That's hilarious. Communists don't have a card to play. So, really quickly, this power struggle's over. We all go on strike. They don't have any way to combat that. You have to match the same card. So basically, the Democratic side wins this power struggle. But if there were, real quick, let's say this Communist player had a strike. They play a strike. Great. You just have to match the suit. The number isn't relevant in that sense. Because I matched the suit, I, as the defender, as the Communist player, get an opportunity to seize the initiative. And that's based on the card that the attacking player played. So I have to roll a 5 or more on a d6, which, amazingly, I did. First time in the whole game that's happened. Therefore, I become the attacker. So then the Communist player looks through their hand, and they play an attacking card. So if you're down on strikes, you might then, I'm going to play a march. The opponent then has to match that with a march of their own. So let's say they play a march. Well, then they might try to seize the initiative back. They've only got to roll a 3, which they don't do, so I get to attack again. You go back and forth that way until you play a card that someone cannot match. The leaders are wild, so the Democratic player can play a church leader, because we have control of a church region in that country. Those are wild. That can match any suit, and they're usually pretty strong as well. So let's say the Democratic player won, which they would have done, because that Communist hand was terrible. Having done that, what you then do is then you resolve kind of the aftermath. So the defending player rolls on the support loss table. They're going to roll a 4, which corresponds, they lose 2 support. If you had raised the ante, this would be a 5, because it has that +1 modifier to it. If you had won using a petition, it would be -2. So winning with petitions can be easy, because there's not as many in there. But you don't win as big, so to speak. If you can win with a rally, it's +2 to this roll. You can start getting into some real significant support losses. So the Communist player is now going to look at East Germany and remove 2 influence from there. And that can be a real big deal based on where you're at on the map and if you want to lose control of areas. So here you might say, I'm going to lose a couple from Erfurt because I control here. I can kind of go back in there on the cheap. So you lose a couple of those. Then the winning player is going to roll a die on this victory point table. And I rolled a 2. 2 gets me 1 victory point. Again, if we'd raised the ante, that would be 3. That would also only correspond to 1. But I'm going to get a victory point, so you go up on the victory point swing. And then, after that, what you're going to do is you're going to consult your little die roll on here. If the Democratic players won and they've rolled a 4 or higher, then the regime just collapses in the country. The communist government will just cease to be in power. It implodes, basically. But because they didn't, that doesn't trigger. The communists remain in power, even though they may have lost the power struggle, they still retain control in an iron grip. They're going to score points. This power value is how many victory points they get. So they're going to get 3 points from that, and then you put out a little influence marker here that says 1. If East Germany scores again and remains in communist control, this goes to a 2, and this is a multiplier. 2 times 3, they're going to score 6 victory points if they can hold on to East Germany the next time it scores. And these can snowball really, really quickly if you can score them multiple times and continue to hold them in communist control. Then, on top of that, you then score your regular presence, domination, and control. So if you've got a presence, you control one region, you're going to get 3 points. If you have domination, you hold more of these battleground states and at least one non-battleground area, then you dominate. You're going to get the 6 victory points. And then you get +1 per battleground. If you control all the battlegrounds, you score the control, and you're probably pretty close to winning anyway because you'll have dominated this area of the board. You'll get a ton of victory points from that because you get 9 +1 for every battleground you control. That's such a big swing if you can start getting into that stuff. And the game's probably coming to a close. The other important part of this is if that government does collapse, this scoring card goes into the trash. It is removed from the game if the democratic player takes power. As such, East Germany can't score again until the final scoring. So there's huge things to weigh up if you're trying to keep that in the game. And I think that's why winning with those petitions is important, because it subtracts from the victory point roll. And so if you can try to do that, it helps to keep those scoring cards in play. So there's more opportunities for the communist player to build on these power points and to help, prevent things snowballing out of hand. If all the scoring cards come out of the game, it's really hard for the communist player to play off of that mechanic that's mostly for them there. But that's the core of what this game is. There's no military actions, so to speak, outside of a couple of these power struggle cards. So we have, you can do a show of force with these tactic fail cards. They can match any suit, but you lose the initiative in doing so. It's such a minimal thing. It's very rare that you roll out the tanks at this, in this part of the world at this time of history. So it's a very much an ideological and political struggle that's going on. And it's a very, very interesting one. What we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the map. 1989. I had a blast with this. It was a good game.
If you like CDGs, if you're into the Twilight Struggle-esque tug-of-war back and forth, this is just the next game up. I mean, it really should be your next game.
How big is the rulebook?
I want to say it was 10 pages.
It's effectively, yeah.
15, and there's an index and a couple of...
You hardly use any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's
Victory conditions end on page 13, and the first page is describing the board and setup. Yeah, it's
8 pages of real rules, frankly.
Yeah.
It's not complex. I mean, the game is not complex.
And I feel like it's... Which is funny, because I felt, I wonder if is it simpler than Twilight Struggle?
Is it simpler? I believe it is.
I think it might be.
I think it's simpler. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is...
It might not be. I'm not sure.
Well, I think those scoring cards... So, the thing that we didn't talk much about in the first segment, those scoring cards being removed from the game really changed the focus of the game.
Yeah, if Poland topples, for example, that's one of the early scoring cards. Yeah. If it goes out quickly...
You don't have to worry as much about Poland.
Yeah, you're then okay, well, I'm just focused on Hungary.
Yeah.
Because Hungary's going to score real soon.
Yeah.
And if that falls, then you're sweet, I got to worry about Bulgaria, or is it Romania?
Well, Czechoslovakia and
East Germany
Bulgaria in the middle years.
Yeah, it was interesting when those get removed from the game.
Yeah.
It shifts the focus.
Yes.
You're less worried about that.
It contracts it.
Yeah.
I think about Twilight Struggle, and even in the late game, I'm still worried about the entire world.
Yeah.
South America, South Africa. I'm still worried about those places.
Yeah.
Because those scoring cards can still come up and tip you over and force you to lose.
Yeah, the removal of those is very
The removal of... And I'm trying to gather my thoughts, but I feel like the removal... The contraction makes it simpler because I don't have to worry about as many different areas. Some might say, well, then it makes it harder because we're both then focused on fewer areas.
Right. It makes it more difficult to affect real change, but I'm not worried about 70 spaces. I'm worried about 50
spaces. Yeah. And remember the comment that I made, man, it started to heat up. East Germany, we were really fighting over there in that middle game because the other 2 scoring opportunities were gone. So we're we really got to fight over this. And I knew you had those in your hand. I mean, I knew it was coming. You could feel it. So I liked how that heated up. I thought Czechoslovakia heated up because it also was in the mix. But yeah, removing those scoring cards, I think really changed it.
Yeah, it's just that's like the one thing that I was surprised about when we got the game out is that there isn't like a play aid card that describes
what the
all your
are.
menu of options and things to do, right?
Because there's only 3.
Things like Twilight Struggle has one, and so does Labyrinth, which is different, but it's, on your turn, you spend your ops to do a myriad of things.
Yeah.
This one, there's really like, you either put points out,
put support out in the spaces,
or you make 2 support checks.
Yep.
Or you toss a guy in the Tiananmen Square track.
Yeah.
That's it. And so, like, you don't need a play aid card for that. But I was surprised
at the beginning we were like,
yeah, where's all my menu of a million things I can do?
It was only 3.
That's not a million things you can do.
It was only 3.
Yeah, and one of them is explained on the board, and the other 2 are the entire game. So you know immediately what it is that you are not allowed to do.
I think the other thing that makes this a little simpler is you do not have the DEF CON.
Yep, that's true.
You have no worry about the world blowing up.
Yeah, so
we're beyond that.
Which then the DEF CON limits where you can and can't do coups.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So you don't have that. You also don't have military operations in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So you're not worrying about putting your cards into that. And that ties into the DEF CON, right? Because if you don't have a certain amount, it goes down, So to me, that made it a little simpler. The other thing I thought that made it simpler was Tiananmen Square is significantly different than the space race. Yeah. You could do that as many times as you want.
Yeah, until it runs out, yeah.
Well,
once you get to the end,
then
you can't
done.
do it anymore.
But you can still do it how many times? 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times? There's only 10 rounds.
Yeah.
So if you had a really bad hand of cards, which both of us had several times, you could do that 2 or 3 times. And you know what? You're not going to succeed every time. So you might be able to do it 10, 12 times.
But you're also just missing out on doing actions doing that.
Yeah, so you're good. It's going to snowball.
I love it.
But I thought that made it a little simpler to manage the damage in my hand. I thought.
No, yeah, that's true.
I also thought it was a little simpler because if you remember in Twilight Struggle, one of the things I love so much about that game is so many of the events have those, well, if this has happened, then it doesn't happen. Or if this condition is in effect, this can't go off. And I feel like I'm always struggling to read through my hand and check, does he have any power in, Taiwan, Thailand? And this didn't have as much of that. It had a little. I don't think it had
less of it, though.
It had less of it. So to me, those 3 or 4 things identify this as a simpler game.
Yeah, and like the thing they added, the power struggle deck, everything's explained on the board and it's not massively complicated.
No.
So I think the stuff they added is less than the stuff that is streamlined from the other game. So yeah, I was very surprised. I don't know. In my brain I thought it was going to be a bit crunchier and a bit more fiddly because it's more granular because it's at the smaller scale, but I don't think it is.
Yeah.
It's easier to play almost.
But it's a good game.
It's very, very good.
It's a good game. I think Jason and Ted did a great job. And like you said, I think you said it best, they didn't just reskin it.
No.
It's Twilight Struggle, the follow-up.
Yes, this is truly a sequel to that game.
Yeah.
Like, so things have been improved, things have been changed where appropriate, and it feels different enough where I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people had both of these in their collection.
I think both of them will sit on your shelf and can either be played because they give a different feeling. They really give a different feeling.
And just even from the focus of what the events are in this very small section of the world, I've heard of more of the things that are in this game than in the other one.
Got it.
Like, those are more global events.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, I might have heard of some of them or, like, vaguely familiar with these, but a lot of this stuff is on a scale where you're like, yep, I've seen a lot of these pictures before. Like, I know who these people are because I learned about them in school. Right. I feel like I know a bit more about this region because I lived in East Germany for a while.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I have a familiarity with this, which is, it's interesting and fun to play in that region as well.
Yeah. Well, and Labyrinth is a similar, I think we know more about the Labyrinth events.
Oh, it's
when
modern,
we play those, it's like, oh, I know that, I remember that. This, I'm older than you.
Yeah.
I also remember some of these events. So, yeah, I really liked this. And at the beginning, when I was playing Scorpions, Wind of Change, if you're too young, like you, to not know that song came out in 1990, a year after the events of, the wall coming down in Tiananmen Square and all that. and it was an anthem to democracy, to the changes that had been seen and experienced. And if you don't know that song, it's a really good song. It's $1.29 on iTunes. Worth the download. You could play it on repeat as you're playing it. You'd get sick of it pretty quickly.
What you have to do is you have to record it onto a cassette and then play it on a boombox on repeat. That's what you have to do.
Because then it will be really time appropriate. Because that's the way we did that back then. But anyway, I love this Cold War game that really gives me that great back and forth Twilight Struggle-esque tug of war with some new toys. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
I'm really glad I got a second edition printing or second printing because they changed the cover a little bit.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they did. It's a different cover than the original. I'm not sure they did any other graphic, but it didn't need it. It's functional. Yeah. It's cool. I like this game.
And the counters were pre-rounded? Is that the case?
They were, yes.
Which is
they
also
were pre-rounded. Yep. So I didn't have to clip all those.
That is
so,
nice. Yeah,
but I liked it a lot.
Yeah,
I really did.
I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed Twilight Struggle.
Yeah.
This is, right next to that in the type of game that it is and the mechanics. Very easy for us to learn because we've played any amount of CDGs before. Yeah. And so there was almost nothing conceptually new that I had to wrap my brain around.
Or that we weren't really getting.
Yeah. So reading the rules was so quick and so easy.
Yeah.
And we had it, and we played it. I had a blast with this, and I would play it again immediately.
So
I would.
I would too. My question is, do you like this or Twilight Struggle better?
Everyone's going to ask that in the comments.
Exactly. They always ask that.
And I want to play this more before I make that decision. Okay. But I really liked this. It might. It could be this one. Honestly, it could be.
I think,
But it could just be recency bias.
It also might, or it also may be because this is different, yet similar. It has similarities, but it's different. It's got some new stuff.
I like the more focused scale of this. I think the things that it adds are really interesting things to think about.
Yeah.
Like when the intellectuals are influencing the universities, when the churches are influencing the workers and the farmers, that stuff's fascinating, and you don't have that in the larger scale. I just think that's a very interesting thing to play around with, and I think I like that a lot in this one.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I really liked it. I'd like to play it again and play it again soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, very good.
1989, Dawn of Freedom from GMT Games. Yeah, big thumbs up for me.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.